That cheap little key around your neck won't buy you a seat at this table, Priya.
You're right. It doesn't buy seats. It decides who gets to keep.
She really thinks that key matters.
A few of the investors laughed politely, assuming it was banter between husband and wife. Devon laughed too. He did not hear the sentence for what it was. He heard a small woman making a small joke, and he moved on. But at the far end of the ballroom, near the tall windows overlooking the harbor, an older man in a gray suit stopped mid-sip. His name was Alistair Cole, and he had been an estate lawyer for 31 years. He was not supposed to be watching Priya Anand. He was supposed to be watching the deal. Yet his eyes had gone to the key, to the tiny crest engraved on its head, a crest he had seen exactly once before, pressed into red wax on a document locked in a vault he was legally forbidden to open without a very specific instruction. He set his glass down and did not pick it up again. The evening was the Holloway Group's annual investor showcase, held on the top floor of a hotel that Devon liked to call practically ours. Crystal light poured over silverware. Waiters moved like shadows. Devon stood at the head of the room in a tailored charcoal suit, gesturing at a projection of skylines and profit curves, promising the room a future. And beside the future, seated one chair down from where a wife should sit, was Priya. She had been moved there quietly, before dinner, by Devon's mother. "You'll be more comfortable near the end, dear," Renata Holloway had said, her rings clicking as she rearranged the place cards. "The head of the table is for people who make things happen." Priya had said nothing. She had simply picked up her small clutch, walked 6 seats down, and sat. She wore a deep green dress that was elegant, but not expensive. The kind of dress a woman buys when she does not need to prove anything. Around her neck hung the only jewelry she ever wore. A gold key, old, slightly worn at the edges, warm from her skin. Devon's newest business partner, a sharp woman named Sloane Everett, leaned toward him with a whisper that was meant to be heard. "Is that real gold, or is it costume?" "Costume feelings," Devon said. "Real cheap." The laughter that time was louder. Priya looked down at her plate, not because she was ashamed of the key, because she was counting the people who laughed, the people who looked away, and the one man near the window who had not laughed at all. She did not argue. She reached for her water and took a slow sip. But that was not the strange part. The strange part was that when the hotel's night manager passed behind her chair to refill glasses, his eyes dropped to the key and his hand froze for half a second over the pitcher. He did not spill. He recovered instantly. But he looked at Priya's face, really looked as if checking it against something. Then he walked to the service door, stepped out, and made a phone call. Devon never noticed. Devon was busy telling the room that within 90 days, the Holloway Group would close the largest acquisition in the company's history, the Merrow Bay development, a waterfront complex worth more than everything his father had ever built. "And once it's done," Devon said, raising his glass, "no one will ever again ask whether the Holloways belong at the top." Priya's fingers rested against the key. The Merrow Bay development. The one thing Devon wanted more than air. She knew something about Merrow Bay that Devon did not. She knew who actually owned the land it sat on. But she did not say it. She only smiled, softly, at her plate, and let him finish his speech. Because the key around her neck had already opened something. It had opened it long before he ever mocked it. He simply had not walked through the door yet. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama, shocking twists, and stories where dignity wins quietly, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thank you all for commenting the previous video. Now let's go back, because to understand why a mocked gold key would one day empty a ballroom of every ounce of Devon Holloway's confidence, you have to understand how a quiet woman ended up sitting 6 seats from her own husband, saying nothing and holding everything. If you enjoy emotional drama, shocking twists, and stories where dignity wins quietly. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thank you all for commenting the previous video. Now let's go back, because to understand why a mocked gold key would one day empty a ballroom of every ounce of Devon Holloway's confidence, you have to understand how a quiet woman ended up sitting 6 seats from her own husband, saying nothing and holding everything. 14 months earlier, none of them would have believed how it ended. Priya Anand had married Devon Holloway on a bright autumn afternoon in a garden outside the city, under trees just beginning to turn gold. She wore her mother's simple dress. He wore a smile that photographers loved. Everyone said it was a strange match. Devon Holloway, heir to a mid-sized property firm, a man who moved through rooms as if he expected applause, and Priya, a woman who worked quietly as a records analyst for a private trust foundation, who spoke softly, who preferred the corner of a party to the center of it. His friends assumed she had married up. His mother assumed the same. No one asked what Priya actually did all day. No one asked why a woman who just organized old files always seemed to understand contracts better than the lawyers Devon hired. No one asked why, when Devon complained about a difficult deal at dinner, Priya would ask one small question that quietly untangled the whole problem. They mistook her calm for simplicity. They mistook her silence for having nothing to say. In the early months, Devon had loved her for it. He called her his still water. He liked that she never competed with him, never demanded the spotlight, never argued in front of guests. He liked that she made him look bigger by standing small beside him. Then the Holloway Group began to struggle. It happened slowly, the way these things do. A deal fell through. A loan tightened. Devon's father, the founder, had died 2 years before, and the business had never quite steadied without him. The old man had been careful, patient, almost secretive about money. Devon was none of those things. Devon liked to spend as if the future had already been won. And as the pressure grew, so did his need to feel powerful somewhere. He found that power in the smallest cruelties. "Why do you always wear that thing?" he asked one evening, nodding at the gold key as she brushed her hair. "It doesn't go with anything. It looks like something a janitor drops." "It was my father's," Priya said. "Your father was a bookkeeper, Priya. It's not exactly a family crown." She turned to look at him. For a moment, something flickered behind her calm, not anger, but a kind of quiet sorrow, the look of someone who is deciding, again, whether to explain something to a person who has already stopped listening. She decided not to. "No," she agreed gently. "It's not a crown." She was right. It wasn't a crown. It was much more useful than one. That word bookkeeper stayed with her, not because it hurt, because it told her exactly how little he had ever bothered to learn about where she came from. And a man who does not learn where you came from will never see what you are carrying. By winter, Devon had stopped introducing her as his wife at events. He introduced her as Priya and let people fill in the rest. And into that empty space, other people began to move. Renata Holloway, Devon's mother, was a woman who wore her family name like armor. She had spent 40 years learning which fork to use, which people to greet, and which people to look through. She had decided, within an hour of meeting Priya, which category her daughter-in-law belonged to. "She's a sweet girl," Renata would say to her friends, "but you can't teach breeding, can you?" The insults were rarely direct. That was Renata's craft. She insulted by generosity. "I bought you something appropriate to wear on Sunday," she said one week, handing Priya a wrapped box. "Since you didn't grow up with these kinds of occasions, I thought I'd help." "Thank you," Priya said, and wore it, and said nothing about the tag still showing the price crossed out from a clearance rack. "That necklace," Renata added, eyeing the gold key as always. "Perhaps leave it home. It cheapens the whole look." "I never take it off," Priya said. "I've noticed," Renata said. "Sentimentality is such a poor person's luxury." The line landed softly. That made it worse. Priya went home that night and sat at the small desk in the room she used as an office. She opened a drawer. Inside was a plain leather folder, worn at the corners, the kind of thing that looks like it holds old tax returns. She did not open it. She only rested her hand on it for a moment, the way a person touches a door they are not yet ready to walk through. Then she closed the drawer and went to bed. And here is the thing the Halloways never understood. Every insult, every dismissal, every sweet girl, said with a smile, Priya was not absorbing it as shame. She was filing it. Because Priya Anand had spent her entire professional life learning one quiet truth. People reveal exactly who they are when they believe you cannot hurt them back. And everything they reveal, if you are patient, becomes a record. She was not angry. She was collecting. But that was not even the beginning of it yet. To understand what was really at stake, you have to understand what Devon wanted. Devon Halloway did not simply want money. He wanted to be seen as the man who had done something his father never had. And the thing his father never had was Marrow Bay. Marrow Bay was a stretch of waterfront on the north edge of the city, 12 acres of prime land, half developed, wrapped in decades of quiet legal complications. Every developer in the region had circled it for years. No one could ever close it. The land sat inside a tangle of ownership so complex that most firms gave up after the first month of due diligence. Devon had convinced himself that he would be the one to solve it. He had spent 18 months and a dangerous amount of the company's remaining cash assembling investors, drawing renderings, throwing dinners, promising a skyline. There was only one problem, and Devon did not know it was a problem. Marrow Bay did not belong to the city. It did not belong to any of the developers who had tried and failed. It belonged, through a chain of holdings so carefully hidden that only 3 people alive fully understood it, to a private family trust. A trust established decades ago by a careful, patient man who believed that the most important assets should never sit in loud hands. That man had been a bookkeeper, then, later, quietly, something much more than a bookkeeper. His name had been Ravi Anand, and he was Priya's father. Devon had married the one person on earth who could hand him Marrow Bay, or keep it from him forever, and he had spent 14 months teaching her exactly which one she should choose. He had no idea the room he wanted to enter had been waiting for her the whole time. The first crack in Devon's confidence did not come from Priya. It came from a lawyer he had never met. Devon's acquisition team had been fighting the Marrow Bay ownership chain for months. Every path led into the same wall, a holding entity called Northlight Holdings, whose beneficial owner was legally shielded. His team could see that Northlight controlled the land. They could not see who controlled Northlight. Someone has to sign off, Devon snapped at his lead attorney during a tense meeting. Land doesn't sell itself. Find the person. We're trying, sir. Northlight only responds through a single trustee of record, an estate firm, Cole and Associates. Devon waved a hand. Then get Cole in a room. What Devon did not know was that Alistair Cole, the same gray-suited man who had frozen at the investor dinner, had already been in the room. Many rooms. For years. He was the trustee of record for Northlight Holdings, and Alistair Cole knew exactly who held the authority behind it. He had watched her sit 6 seats down from her own husband and say nothing. 2 days after the dinner, Alistair did something he had never done in 31 years of service. He requested a private meeting with the sole beneficiary of the trust he managed, not by phone, in person. They met in a small tea shop, far from the city center, the kind of place with fogged windows and no one important inside. Mrs. Halloway, he began. Anand, she corrected gently. I kept my name for work. Ms. Anand, he folded his hands. You understand what your husband is trying to buy. I've understood it longer than he has, Priya said. Alistair studied her. You know that Marrow Bay is held under Northlight, and you know that Northlight answers to the Anand family trust, which means it answers to you. I know. Then you also know, Alistair said carefully, that as things stand, your husband cannot complete his acquisition without the trust's authorization. and the trust's authorization requires the physical presentation of the founder's instrument, the key. Priya's hand rose to her collarbone. He calls it costume jewelry, she said softly. Alistair almost smiled. Almost. Your father designed it that way, he said. He believed the most important key in a family should be the one no thief ever thinks to steal. A key that looks like nothing, worn by someone the world underestimates. For a moment, neither of them spoke. May I ask you something? Alistair said finally. You could have stopped all of this a year ago. One phone call. Why haven't you? Priya looked out the fogged window. Because, she said, I wanted to know who he really was before I decided what to do with what I have. She paused. Now I know. That was when the gold key stopped looking sentimental. The Holloway Group's engagement with its investors reached its peak at the Marrow Bay Preview Gala, a lavish event Devon threw in the same hotel ballroom, this time to celebrate what he called the final stretch of the acquisition. Everyone who mattered was invited. Bankers, city officials, the full investor board, Renata in emerald and diamonds, and, on Devon's arm that night, not his wife, but Sloane Everett, the sharp new partner, in a gown that cost more than most people's cars. Priya arrived alone. She wore the same green dress, the same gold key. At the door, a young man with a guest list looked up at her. Name? Priya Anand. He scanned, frowned, scanned again. I'm sorry. I don't see you here. Try Holloway, she said quietly. He checked. His frown deepened. I have a Devon Holloway +1. The +1 is listed as Ms. Everett. Priya said nothing. At that moment, Devon appeared behind the young man. Sloane's arm laced through his, a drink already in his hand. Ah, Priya. He said her name the way one acknowledges bad weather. I didn't think this would be your kind of evening. Lots of important people. Lots of talking. I'd like to come in, Devon. He looked at her, then at the guests filtering past, then at Sloane, who was already smiling in anticipation. You know what? He said, loud enough for the nearest cluster of guests to hear. There's a lounge downstairs. The staff use it. Very comfortable. Someone will bring you something. This room's a bit much for the key and clearance dress crowd. The word staff rippled outward. A few people laughed. Renata, passing by, patted Priya's arm with false warmth. It's for the best, dear, she murmured. You'd only feel out of place up here. Sloane leaned in, her voice a stage whisper. Is that the famous key? God. He wasn't exaggerating. She reached out, almost touched it, then pulled her hand back as if it might be dirty. It's the only thing she owns, isn't it? Pretty much, Devon said, and turned away. They walked into the ballroom together, into the light and the music, leaving Priya standing at the threshold of a room she was not permitted to enter. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She stood very still for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned and walked toward the elevators. But she did not go down to the staff lounge. She rode up, because there was one door in that hotel that Devon Holloway did not know existed, and her key opened it. Here is what most people do when they are humiliated in public. They replay it. They rage about it. They call a friend and pour out every word. Priya did none of that. She sat in the back of a quiet car outside the hotel and opened a slim folder on her lap. Inside was every piece of the last 14 months, kept the way a careful archivist keeps history. There was the guest list screenshot her lawyer's associate had quietly requested, showing her name deliberately removed and replaced. There were the text messages Devon had sent to Sloane obtained, entirely legally, through a discovery process Priya had already begun, where he called Marrow Bay, the deal that finally makes me untouchable, and called his wife the least of my problems. She has nothing and knows nothing. There were financial records showing that Devon had been quietly moving company assets to cover personal debts, records showing that the very cash he was using to court investors did not fully belong to him. And there was one more thing, a recording. 2 weeks earlier, at a smaller dinner, Devon had stood among his investors and, believing his wife was in another room, laughed about the key. My wife's whole inheritance, his voice said on the recording, is a piece of gold that opens nothing. Her father was a nobody. I married Charity. Priya listened to it once. Her face did not change. She did not save it because it hurt. She saved it because it would matter later. She closed the folder. Then she made 2 phone calls. The first was to Alistair Cole. "It's time," she said. "Prepare the instrument." The second was to a man named Grant O'Say, the trust's forensic accountant, who had been quietly examining the Holloway Group's books for 3 weeks under a legitimate trustee inquiry. "Grant, what did you find?" "Ms. Anand," he said carefully. "He's not just over-leveraged. There are signatures on 2 of the Northlight preliminary documents that shouldn't exist. Someone forged trust authorization to keep the investors calm. Someone told them the deal was already cleared." Priya was quiet for a moment. "He forged the trust's approval," she said. "He forged your approval," Grant answered. "In effect." She looked out the window at the golden light of the ballroom high above. "Then he's already decided how this ends," she said. "He just doesn't know it yet." The board of the Holloway Group's investor group had scheduled a decisive vote. In 72 hours, at the closing dinner of the gala week held in the same hotel, in the same top-floor ballroom, the investors would formally commit their capital to the Marrow Bay acquisition. Devon had promised them that the land's ownership issue was resolved. He had shown them a document with a trust authorization on it. The document was forged. In 72 hours, either that lie would carry Devon to the biggest win of his life, or it would collapse in front of every person whose opinion he had ever cared about. But there was a second clock, and this one only Priya and Alistair could see. The Anand family trust had a provision written into it by Ravi Anand decades before. The founder's key, the gold key, was not merely symbolic. It was the physical instrument required to activate the trust's controlling authority over Northlight Holdings and everything beneath it, including Marrow Bay. For 14 months, Priya had chosen not to activate it. Once activated, it could not be undone quietly. It would formally place every asset, the land, the holdings, the controlling interest that Devon's entire future depended on under Priya's direct, documented authority, in front of witnesses, on the record. "Once you turn it," Alistair warned her, "there is no soft ending. He will know. Everyone will know." "I've spent 14 months on the soft ending," Priya said. "I tried love. I tried patience. I tried being small enough to keep the peace." She touched the key. He mistook all of it for weakness. She looked at Alistair. "Turn it," she said, at the closing dinner, in front of the board. The silence after she said it did not feel like weakness anymore. It felt like a countdown. 2 days before the closing dinner, Devon Holloway got his first hint that the ground beneath him was not solid. It started small. His personal banker called to say that a routine transfer had been flagged and held. Not blocked, held, pending verification of underlying ownership authority. "What does that mean?" Devon demanded. "It means," the banker said cautiously, "that a trustee inquiry has been opened on some of the assets connected to your accounts. Until it's resolved, we can't move certain funds." "A trustee inquiry from who?" "I'm not able to disclose that, sir." Devon slammed the phone down. That afternoon, his lead attorney came to him, pale. "The Northlight authorization," the lawyer said. "The one you gave us. It's been challenged. Someone with actual standing over the trust has filed a formal notice contesting its validity." "Contesting? That's impossible. Who has standing over the trust? Nobody can even find the beneficiary." The lawyer swallowed. "That's the thing, sir. The filing came from the beneficiary, directly, and it names the document as forged." The word hung in the office. Meanwhile, across town, something quieter and stranger happened. Priya went to the hotel that afternoon, alone, to confirm arrangements for the closing dinner arrangements she had made, through Alistair, without Devon's knowledge. As she crossed the lobby, the night manager she had seen weeks before appeared at her side. He glanced briefly at the gold key, Then he did something no one at the Holloway table had ever done for her. He inclined his head slightly and said, "Good afternoon, ma'am. Everything is ready on the top floor. The private archive room has been unlocked for your access, as instructed." "Ma'am," one word, said with real respect. Priya paused. Something in her chest loosened, just slightly. "Thank you," she said, "because here is a small truth the Halloways never learned. The people who carry the trays, hold the doors, and remember the names, they always know who really owns a room long before the loud people figure it out." The first door had already closed on Devon. He simply thought it was a paperwork delay. The night of the closing dinner arrived gold and glittering. The top-floor ballroom had been transformed. White orchids, candlelight on marble, a long table for the investor board, and beyond it, dozens of the city's most important people, all invited to witness the moment Devon Holloway secured his legacy. Devon arrived like a king. He wore a new suit, deeper and sharper than anything before. Sloane was on his arm again in silver. Renata glided beside them, greeting old friends, her chin high. At the head of the table, Devon stood beneath a projection of the Marrow Bay skyline, the future he had promised, rendered in glass and light. "Tonight," he told the room, his voice warm and certain, "we don't just close a deal, we close an era of doubt. My father built carefully, I built boldly, and tonight, Marrow Bay becomes ours." Applause. He had one small worry in the back of his mind, the frozen transfer, the strange filing about the trust, but his lawyers had assured him it was a formality, a nuisance from some obscure claimant that would sort itself out. Nothing that could touch tonight. He raised his glass. "To the future," he said, "to the Halloways." And that was when the double doors at the back of the ballroom opened. Priya walked in, not in the green dress this time, in deep navy, simple and precise, the color of authority. Beside her walked Alistair Cole, in his gray suit, carrying a slim leather portfolio. Behind them came Grant O'Say, with a case of documents, and behind them came the hotel's general manager and two members of the investor board's own compliance committee, whom Priya had contacted through entirely proper channels. The room went quiet, the way rooms do when they sense that something has shifted and no one has explained why yet. Devon's smile flickered. "Priya," he said, half a laugh in his voice, "this is a closed event. I told you. I know what you told me," Priya said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "You told me the staff lounge was more my kind of room." She walked forward, unhurried, until she reached the head of the table where he stood. "But this room," she said, "has always been mine." Alistair Cole stepped forward and addressed the investor board directly, in the flat, precise voice of a man reading fact into a record. "Good evening. My name is Alistair Cole, of Cole and Associates. For the past several decades, I have served as trustee of record for the Anand Family Trust and for its controlling entity, Northlight Holdings." A murmur moved through the investors. Northlight. They knew that name. It was the wall their own due diligence had never gotten past. It was the entity that actually owned the Marrow Bay land. "Northlight Holdings," Alistair continued, "is the beneficial owner of the Marrow Bay development. It has been for 31 years. No sale, transfer, or acquisition of that land can be completed without the express, documented authorization of the trust's sole controlling beneficiary." He turned slightly toward Priya. "That beneficiary is Ms. Priya Anand." The silence that followed was total. Devon's face had gone the color of the marble beneath him. That's not possible," he said. "Her father was a bookkeeper." "Her father," Alistair said, "was Ravi Anand. He began as a bookkeeper. He ended as one of the most careful private landholders this city has ever had. He built his holdings quietly, on purpose, and he left them to the one person he trusted to never wield them cruelly, his daughter." Alistair opened the leather portfolio. Inside, on heavy paper, was the founding instrument of the trust, and at the top, pressed in red wax, was a crest, the same crest engraved on the head of the small gold key around Priya's neck. "The trust," Alistair said, was designed so that its controlling authority could never be forged, stolen, or bluffed. Activation requires the physical presentation of the founder's instrument, a single, unique object. Priya reached up, and for the first time in 14 months, she lifted the gold key over her head. She held it up so the whole room could see it. "He called this costume jewelry," she said softly. "He called it the only thing I own. He was almost right about one part. It is the most important thing I own." She looked at Devon. "Because it doesn't open doors, Devon. It opens records. It opens ownership. It authorizes everything you have spent 18 months trying to buy with money that was never fully yours." She set the key down on the leather portfolio over the wax crest. It fit the impression exactly. Grant Osei stepped forward next and addressed the Compliance Committee. "There are additional matters the board must be made aware of," he said. "The Northlight authorization Mr. Holloway presented to secure your commitments was not issued by the trust. It was forged. We have the documentation." He set a folder on the table. "We also have records indicating that company assets were moved to cover personal obligations, and that certain funds represented to this board as available were, in fact, encumbered." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Each sentence landed like a door quietly closing. Devon looked around the room for an ally. He found none. The investors were not looking at him with admiration anymore. They were looking at him the way people look at a man who has cost them money. Sloane Everett had already taken 2 steps away from his side, her hand no longer on his arm, her face rearranging itself into that of a person who had merely been passing through. Renata Holloway stood frozen, her diamonds suddenly heavy, her chin no longer high. "Priya," Devon said, and now his voice had lost all its warmth. "Whatever you think you're doing, we can talk about this privately. We're family." Priya looked at him for a long moment. "We tried private," she said. "You chose the ballroom." She turned to the board. "I have no interest in humiliating anyone. I have interest only in the truth being on the record. Marrow Bay is not for sale under the terms Mr. Holloway offered you, because Mr. Holloway never had the authority to offer them. I would ask you all to protect yourselves accordingly." She picked the key back up and slipped the chain over her head. "That's all," she said. He had mocked the only thing in the room that could have saved him. The consequences did not arrive as shouting. They arrived, as Priya had always known they would, as paper. By morning, the investor board had formally withdrawn its commitments to the Marrow Bay acquisition, citing material misrepresentation of ownership authority. The deal Devon had staked his name on was over before breakfast. Within a week, the Compliance Committee referred the forged authorization to the appropriate authorities. Devon's own lawyers, unwilling to be attached to a forgery, quietly resigned. The frozen transfers were never released. The trust inquiry confirmed what Grant Osei had found, and the misused company assets became a matter for the Holloway Group's remaining creditors. Devon was removed from operational control of his own family firm by the very people he had spent his life trying to impress. Not with a scene, with a vote recorded in minutes and a letter delivered by courier. Renata Holloway's phone, once so full of important friends, grew quiet. Invitations stopped arriving. The name she had worn like armor turned out to be worth exactly as much as the deals it was attached to. Sloane Everett was gone before the week ended, already attached to some other man's rising skyline. And the divorce, when it came, was almost gentle in its efficiency. Priya asked for nothing of Devon's, because Priya had never needed anything of Devon's. She had come into the marriage holding more than he would ever hold. She simply signed the response her lawyer prepared, set down the pen, and let it be finished. There was no screaming, there was no final confrontation. There was only truth, boundaries, and the quiet closing of a chapter. Marrow Bay stayed with the trust. In time, Priya developed it herself, carefully, patiently, the way her father would have. A stretch of it became public waterfront, open to anyone, with a small garden near the water where families sat in the evenings. Months later, On a soft, golden morning, Priya walked through that garden alone. She stopped near the water and looked out at the city her father had quietly helped hold together. At the skyline she now stewarded, not to prove anything, but simply because it was hers to care for. Her hand rose, as it always did, to the gold key at her collarbone. It was still worn at the edges, still warm from her skin, still the kind of thing an arrogant man might mistake for nothing. But she no longer wore it as a secret, or a shield, or a quiet defiance. She wore it the way her father had intended, as a reminder that the most important power is the kind that never needs to announce itself, that patience is not weakness, that dignity, kept intact through every insult, is its own inheritance. She had not needed revenge to feel whole. She had only needed the truth to finally stand in the room, in the light, where everyone could see it. Priya closed her hand around the key, felt its familiar shape, and smiled, not at anyone, not for anyone, just for herself. Then she let it rest against her heart, where it had always belonged, and walked on into the morning.